Well, hi, hello, and welcome to 4 Steps for End-to-End Software Risk Management. Now, today's webinar is sponsored by Synopsys and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name's Jess Steinbach. I'm with Actual Tech Media, and I'm so happy that I get to be here as your moderator today as our expert speakers help us unpack how to effectively scale application security in a dynamic and rapidly evolving landscape. Together, as we go through this conversation, we're going to explore the complexities of our modern environments and then determine key actionable steps and innovative strategies that will help you manage software risk within your organization. This is such an important conversation, and I'm so excited to bring our expert speakers on out here with us in just a moment. We've got lots to do. We've got some cool demos lined up. I know you're going to love it. So I'm just going to zip through a few housekeeping points, and then we can get this show on the road. So let's start with a little guided tour of your audience console today. We're going to take a look at the questions window. Now, this is a great place to start for a few reasons, because first and foremost, we want to hear from you today. This is going to be an interactive conversation. We're going to take some Q&A at the end. And the absolute best part of joining in these types of webinars is getting to ask questions directly of experts like we have here with us today. So be sure you get your questions in. I said there was 2 great things about participating in that questions window. One is getting those questions in and talking to our experts, and the others is talking to our wonderful community members. So you can give that a try right now. Say hi, say hello, let us know how your day is doing. What are you up to? How are things in your neck of the woods? And give that a little test run right now. Now, if at any point during our webinar today, you have issues with slides or maybe some audio, something's not going well for you, here's your first step. Your first step is a browser refresh. I promise that's going to clear out most of the usual tech gremlins. But if they've really got a hold of you today, somebody definitely fed them after midnight. I get it. That happens sometimes. If the browser refresh doesn't work, you're going to post in that questions window, let the Actual Tech Media team know that you're having some issues, and we will be there to help you out. All right, now, my friends, the next thing that is really exciting to know is that we have an incredible, absolutely jam-packed resource tab for you. So we were starting in that questions window. You're going to go 1 tab over, and you're going to find the full handouts list, all these incredible takeaways from our conversation today. Now, don't go down the rabbit hole and start reading them just yet, because we've got a whole lot of content coming your way. But I promise you that once we finish this conversation, you are going to want to spend some time exploring and digging in a little bit further. So you're going to want to have those resources open. So open them all now, download, open those tabs, keep those separate. And as soon as we wrap up the webinar, you can spend some time exploring those. And it's not just awesome content that we have for all of you here today. As you can see on your screen, we also have that $250 Amazon gift card that we will give away as a prize drawing at the end of our webinar. Now, you do need to be here in live attendance during the webinar in order to win that prize, and all winners must meet the Actual Tech Media prize terms and conditions. If you're not sure what those are, don't worry, I don't have them memorized either. That's complicated. You can go over to that handouts tab that we were just chatting about, click and scroll all the way through all those cool resources, and you will find the full T's and C's waiting for you at the bottom of that handouts tab there. All right, now let's talk about one more super awesome prize that we have on the radar for all of you today, because not only does asking a question help steer the conversation and bring up the excitement and the engagement, and you get to know some cool people here in the community, if all of that wasn't enough, we also have a $50 Amazon gift card that we will be giving away to the best question asked. Now, here's the fun part. We are reviewing all of the questions asked after we wrap up the webinar. So we're going to do a live Q&A at the end with our wonderful speakers here. But even if your question doesn't get asked during the Q&A, if we run out of time, don't worry, because you are still entered to win. So get those questions in. Make sure that you get those questions in today, because it's going to make everything that little bit of extra awesome. And you could be winning that $50 Amazon gift card. All right, well, that was it for all the housekeeping. I said we'd keep it short and sweet, and I meant it, because we have some great content to get to. I cannot wait to bring our incredible speakers on out here with us. Today, I am so excited to introduce you all to Natasha Gupta, Senior Product Marketing Manager at Synopsys, and Rod Musser, Senior Director of Product Management, also at Synopsys. Let me get Natasha and Rod out here with us. Here we go. We've got the whole wonderful crew. And Natasha, I think you're going to kick us off today. You're going to give us a little bit of info about you and Rod, and best of all, what we're going to be digging into and exploring together today. Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Jess, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you, everybody, for joining us for our webinar today. My name is Natasha Gupta, and I'm with Synopsys Product Marketing, leading our initiatives for application security posture management, something we'll be talking to you a little bit about today. And I'm joined by my colleague, Rod Musser from Product Management. And today in our webinar, we're going to be talking about the new application landscape and really highlighting what are some best practices around risk management that are important for organizations to keep in mind. In a recent Forrester report, the top tactical priorities for organizations are more and more shifting towards accounting for application security, for being able to shift left in an effective way that aligns their security strategy with really taking into context the developer day to day. And a lot of what we're going to be talking to you in today's presentation is how do you start making that transition to having a software centric risk management strategy? And what are some practical steps to achieving that with application security posture management, or ASPM, something we've been hearing more and more about in the industry today. So, with that, we will jump into a couple of the larger level problems that really are top of mind for organizations in this new landscape. So, one of the aspects of what is plaguing software security today is, though we have really seen a lot of evolution in the way that software development has increased in velocity, especially in a post-generative AI landscape where more and more the issues with software security are going to become forefront, with organizations increasingly adopting open source LLMs with AI generated code. There has to be a way in which the security apparatus is able to keep up with that speed of refresh and of application production. And yet, increasingly, what we still see across the board in organizations all across the landscape is that there's a largely reactive application security response. That there's this notion of patching problems as they come up, of responding to issues in a piecemeal fashion. And a lot of this is because a lot of the tooling, a lot of the data and process around this in deducing issues to triage, in being able to pinpoint root problems that are high priority, is largely siloed and in many cases manual. There's a lot of information that organizations still largely keep in spreadsheets, in homegrown tools, and a lot of this is very disconnected. And therefore, you have a very fragmented view of software risk. For a lot of organizations today, it's very difficult for them to get an overall picture of what does my organization's footprint look like when it comes to the ability for me to audit and verify the compliance of various applications under my purview across different departments, across a team. Then there's really no oversight of applications, of security data. And as a result, what you can't see is often hiding under the radar of what you're deploying to production level apps, that oftentimes we see an application is foregoing a security check even because it's simply too slow to be able to integrate testing within the application development cycle, and to be able to really see critical issues in a proactive manner. Now, what we have often thought as a panacea to addressing that pain is that we throw a tool at the problem to be able to solve the problem. But what we actually see manifesting in the current application security landscape is that tools are only addressing part of that pain. And if we think of the larger level objectives in accomplishing a certain level of speed to your application security program in order to scale that application security program, we can start to see the pitfalls of some of what tools accomplish here, and also what they, moreover, are not able to completely address. For these various stakeholders in the security process, such as developers, the problem that they often run into is that Well, I have a security tool, but it can't rank my level of risk with a particular finding that is discovered. It cannot verify the fix that needs to be committed. And as a result, that mounting technical debt and the overwhelming volume of alerts that developers are having to face day to day is often why there's a lot of security friction that really accompanies many initiatives to be able to integrate application security effectively with their day to day. For the security lead, the issue is often that while their tools can very effectively test for a lot of different kinds of issues and comprehensively see what kinds of issues are uncovered, it cannot accomplish a certain level of testing coverage. And so there's a desire to actually achieve that level of coverage over simply having a tool be able to show you every kind of issue nested within that individual tool. For the CISO at large, it's often boiling down to when they look at the efficacy of their application security program and being able to scale it, well, it can take them years to onboard and integrate the multiple tools required to be able to achieve that comprehensive application security. And even after all of that, there's an inability at large when so much is nested in these individual silos to be able to see the overall impact and the efficacy of what they have implemented. Now, ultimately, what in, let's say, the ideal application security scenario do a lot of these stakeholders want? For the developer to be able to accomplish the level of speed that they want, they would ideally want to know how to fix and what to fix within the tools they work within every day. They'd like to avoid being forced to go into multiple security tools, get trained on these multiple tools, and be able to understand their most critical work from the get-go. For the security lead, it's ideal to be able to automate a lot of these workflows around what are some critical testing remediation activities around their security program and be able to do this through policies. And for the CISO, it's ultimately to gauge the overall criticality of the overall effectiveness of their teams. Well, they would like one place to be able to view and audit that software risk across their organization and have a single source of truth. Now, all of this ultimately boils up to a level of outcomes to be able to keep this level of security efficacy very continuous across the org. What does that actually mean when it comes to various phases of that? They want to be able to accelerate adoption. There's a desire to have continuous and incremental security feedback. And there's overall a desire to mold the AppSec program to be able to continuously integrate within the existing software developer tooling and a lot of the processes around bridging that gap between security and development teams. There's also a desire to optimize the workflow and to be able to simplify how well this can be integrated within the developer's day-to-day by having pre-built onboarding for the project structure, for the tooling that a lot of software development is based around. And overall, being able to consolidate risk. And really what it means is being able to effectively audit your software and to be able to normalize what you're seeing of all of the security data you're collecting at every single stage of the SDLC. And all of the tooling is consolidated into one place when it comes to the data and the rich set of data points that you're producing to get the footprint of your risk. Now, managing security posture is a lot more complex than what you would think. And there are many, many tools that organizations adopt to be able to get the data points that they need. So, Rod, talk to us a little bit about what you hear from customers in terms of how they start about this journey in adopting security tooling, and what is it that is lacking in that process when they go on this journey to be able to comprehensively manage their security posture across.
Right. With the development of DevOps methodologies and processes, it's really evolved the way that we build software. Right. It used to be okay. We'll do a build, we'll do some regression testing, and then maybe we'll do the security testing at that point. Right. And we quickly learned that just like software bugs, it's a lot easier and cheaper to find and fix vulnerabilities earlier in the SDLC. So, that whole shift left movement's happened over the last few years in terms of development as well as in security testing. And what's ended up is now, there are different tools that are ideal for different parts of the SDLC. So, if you look at, when I talk to organizations, most are doing some combination of testing at different points that we see here. So they, probably doing static analysis at the code development level, when a developer checks in new code, or when you do a build in a pipeline, you run a static analysis there. You may be doing dynamic analysis, in a pre-production or a production environment. You may be doing your SCA during the build. So what's evolved now is you've got all these solutions that are really good at finding vulnerabilities at different stages of the software development lifecycle. But now, and on average, we've got data that shows, your average organization is using about 6 different tools in this environment. And so now what that's led to is you got the tools reporting on their own what they can see, but they report it in slightly different ways. They may use different taxonomies on how they report it, and there's no single source of truth now, a way to get over, okay, well, at the end of the day, what are we trying to figure out? What are the most important vulnerabilities or things that are introducing the most risk into my organization? What are the things we need to focus on? And so we've got really good detection capabilities, right? Across the SDLC through all the tools and options that are out there. But now it's very difficult. It's a very fragmented view. So how can we get a nice comprehensive view so we know what the most important thing we need to focus on today is?
Absolutely. And it really comes back to a couple of key questions that we hear across the board from organizations really of any level of security maturity and size, which is really figuring out what was tested, what was found, what was fixed, what's the extent of my exposure. This still continues to be a very difficult question to resolve in even after the adoption of, as you point out, multiple security tools across the process to be able to ascertain that. Because at a large level, from one customer that we talked to once, it's like finding a needle in a stack of needles, and it's a lot harder than what we think to be able to ascertain that. And so, Rod, talk to us a little bit about the evolution of application security posture management, or ASPM, and really how this fits into the overall problem that you highlighted, which we've started to see with AppSec maturity and security adoption.
Right. So we've kind of had a confluence of different events, right? I mean, it used to be that, okay, there was the security team and maybe they were responsible for testing the code. And then you had things like, methodologies like BSIM come into place, and for good reason, right? How can we bring security as part of the development practice? And then with the evolution of DevOps, right, where instead of, doing discrete incremental releases, over time, you're going that to, hey, when a feature is done, push it out into production, right? You may be pushing out to production multiple times a week, multiple times a day, multiple times an hour in some, really mature DevOps organizations. So then that, how does the application security team get ahead of that curve to make sure what we're promoting to production is secure? And then with the growth of security and compliance frameworks and greater regulation out there, where companies need to prove compliance with these regulations and with these policies, that also increase the need to have a way to centralize your vulnerabilities, getting a good view and be able to report compliance with that scheme. So all of these have sort of combined, and that's sort of where application security posture management grew out of these needs that have evolved over the last few years.
And it's definitely a approach that is growing in the general consensus around how do we start to adopt our vulnerability program, our risk management strategy around really being a lot more software centric and recognizing a lot of those needs. But what are really the four key abilities that you need to accomplish in achieving what we would term maybe true ASPM? And so one of the aspects of this to keep in mind is that it's an overall maturity journey that you embark on with achieving ASPM. But the four building blocks really of being able to accomplish that and what you need to be looking for in your solution are the ability to really integrate tooling across a heterogeneous environment. The key connectivity that an ASPM solution has into the various tools that you're using both in your security stack and with all of the developer tooling that you're using is a very key component of how you start to derive value of all of this rich data that you're generating, not just on security issues that you're finding, but also the software inventory that you manage. The next part of that is being able to have an effective way of prioritizing critical issues and really deducing down what's the work that matters most. The next part of that is being able to do effective workflow management and really being able to centralize security activities and identify those security activities and predefine them, being able to do that through policy and being able to standardize that across your org. And then all of the work that you've put into defining workflows and into being able to centralize a lot of this data in an effective way is going to give you an accurate view of software risk and really being able to understand the risk footprint across your software. So with that, let's go into the first step of accomplishing ASPM, which is really being able to integrate these testing sources, to be able to correlate data across the board. Rod, if you could speak to how in looking and assessing for the ability of an ASPM solution to be able to effectively integrate with your current security stack and with also your developer tooling. Could you talk to us a little bit about aspects of correlation that are important to look for here, and what ideally do you need to embark on when you're looking to integrate a lot of this information with an ASPM tool?
Right. So, first of all, we tend to, maybe think about security testing, and we think about, the static analysis tools that we run and any of the automated tools that we use to effectively scan all of these applications that we have. But let's, when you're thinking about, hey, I need to organize everything into kind of a central source of truth, don't forget about the manual efforts that you're taking and making sure that you can get the findings from those manual efforts into your organized view, right? So pen testing, right? Usually it comes out in a form, done by a third party, and it comes out, or maybe in an internal group, and it comes in the form of like a PDF or, a hard document. Things like you may be doing bug bounties. You might be doing, good old, manual code reviews. So still happen. You may be getting findings from those. So one thing is to make sure that you're integrating from all of your sources and not just forget about, not just focusing on the automated, but your manual efforts as well. And then when we're talking about that organized view, organized is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. How do we create, what does an organized view mean? And so when you think about it, tools have, each individual tool that you might be using has, different taxonomies it uses and different terms it uses to describe vulnerabilities. So simple examples are things like, one tool may be using things like to describe the severity of a vulnerability as critical, high, medium, low. And another tool might be using a 1 through 5 scale. And even there, like, is one critical or is one the least critical? Which way are you going on that? And so to provide that organized view, you've got to normalize that data, right? You got to normalize, okay, we're going to agree, we're going to settle on everything's going to be critical, high, medium, low. And then you need to be able to map, okay, well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1 maps to critical, right? So you have that single view and a single way to evaluate like the criticality of a vulnerability, or even something as simple as the name of the vulnerability, right? Because a non-AppSec person, maybe they know what SQL injection is, but if a tool sends them a report and says you have a SQLi vulnerability, they may not know, okay, we're talking about the same thing there. Or, like OS commanding versus OS command injection. They're the same thing, but, from someone who's not doing security day to day may not know that those are equivalent. So even something as simple as name and normalizing that data into a single language, essentially, a common scoring mechanism is really important. We talk about correlation of issues. At the end of the day, the developer not only, the developer has a ton of work on their plate, right? They're building new capabilities into the product, right? That's probably their top priority. They're fixing functional bugs. They are eliminating functional technical debt, right? And now we're adding, okay, now I need you to fix all these security vulnerabilities. We don't want to dump them with 100 different things. And, from a tooling perspective, it's really important to drive and say that if let's take, for example, in a dynamic application scan, let's say you've got an out of date or an old you're using an old version of SSL, right? You're not using the latest TLS 1.3. A DAS scanner might come back and say, at each URL endpoint, oh, you're using an old version of SSL. You need to upgrade that. Well, it may report it on every single URL in your application. So you may have 100 findings out of that, right? You want to correlate that down to a single finding because why is that? Because it's a single fix on that application, right? You've got to update that web servers to use the latest version of TLS. That's the remediation. It only needs to be done once. You don't need to fix it 100 times. So when you talk about correlation, a lot of times, it's really fun to talk about cross-product correlation. But even within a single type of finding, you can correlate things down. Like, do you really care that a particular component has 3 different CVEs associated with it? The remediation is to upgrade that component, right, to one where those CVEs have been addressed. You don't want 3 findings for each CVE. You want to give that developer 1 finding. So correlation is really important there. And then the other thing is, when you're organizing that view, to be able to identify, with software, you're going to have multiple versions, multiple branches of that software, and you're probably going to be doing scanning on each of those branches to be able to identify and organize, okay, these vulnerabilities are in this branch, and here's a vulnerability on this branch that is unique. And then,
sorry to interrupt you, but I think a very important aspect of what you bring up here is the value of correlation in reducing AppSec noise for a developer, and the topic of risk ranking in the value of correlating data. In being able to correlate various risk rankings of tools that you're using and being able to come up with a normalized risk taxonomy, which really leads us into the second step of what an ASPM tool is enabling you to do in being able to effectively implement software risk management, which is really being able to accelerate that time to prioritize key issues and bridge the gap between security and development teams in being able to accelerate remediation. So, Rod, if you would, talk to us about what are some key capabilities that once you're able to achieve that level of data correlation and you're able to derive a clean repository of what are the most critical issues that developers need to fix. What's the next step in what an ASPM solution should be able to provide you from a capability standpoint to be really able to add value in the prioritization and workflow process with bridging that gap between security and development.
Right. And so, one of the key things we talked about earlier is that, we look at the developer, they want to work within their tool set. They don't want to have to go to a bunch of different things to figure out what to do. You need to, in order to really successfully, have a good vulnerability mitigation program, you need to, go to where the developers are. And so a key capability in an ASPM solution is to be able to take all those findings that you are correlating and aggregating and normalizing, and then be able to not only send it to where the developers organize their work, which is generally some sort of ticketing system like Jira, right? But be able to sync the statuses between the two. So if you go and take a finding, you have your solution create a Jira ticket for it, you're going to want to know, okay, when the developer marks that as fixed, you're going to want that updated back in your ASPM solution, right? So that is a bi-directional sync so that the developers can work where they are and are updating the status to you automatically is super key to really scaling this process up.
And, when we talk about scaling the process, there's another aspect of that, which is being able to standardize and enforce a security runbook across maybe various teams, departments that you're managing that may also have different tooling that they're using, or they are perhaps managed in different locations, and they have their own processes or maybe lack of process around testing and remediation. And being able to centralize how you are able to view and manage those security activities. So, Rod, if you would talk to us a little bit about really the importance of centralized policy here in taking what you have in your AppSec program to really the next level in taking the data, the tooling, the people and process around this. And being able to leverage an ASPM solution in being able to leverage policies that will allow you to standardize your AppSec program across the board and enable that level of scale.
Yeah. So, when we think about policy, we can think of it in a couple different ways. So your organization probably has policy around, when you do security testing, how often you do it. And ASPM has a couple different possible roles here. One is to act as a validator, making sure that you are executing your security testing when and where and on the right actions or on the right triggering actions, and ensure that they secure or prove that a lot of compliance schemes say, hey, you have to do continuous monitoring, and then you need to provide an auditor proof of that. ASPM can be a central place to say, look at here, I'm doing my SAS scans on pull requests. I'm doing a DAS scan every time I promote to a pre-production. It can prove, and as well from an execution standpoint, if you're a CISO or if you're an AppSec manager, you want to know, okay, we haven't run a SAS scan in a week. That's something you probably want to be aware of and alerted to understand, to understand why. You can't just assume that, we didn't find any vulnerabilities this week, they must be doing a great job. You want to validate, we're actually testing this code, right? So that's one role ASPM solutions can play. Another potential role is that ASPM solution can actually be the tool used to orchestrate the scans. And that's really dependent upon, sometimes I'll see that where, in most organizations, the testing is integrated into the pipeline or is integrated into, things like triggered by GitHub Actions and that sort of thing. But sometimes the security team wants a kind of an overview role, and sometimes maybe want to do their own scans as a check. And they could have the ASPM tool orchestrate that scanning as well. So either a validation or an execution mode. And so when you take a look at, okay, how do I build a policy around when testing should occur? What should be the factors into that? Obviously, applications that are critical to the business, where there's large downtime risk. If there's if a breach were to occur, it would could cost revenue. It could cause risk to the business. Obviously those types of applications, you may want to have more frequent or more types of testing occurring on that than maybe some internal app that is used by a small portion of the organization. The type of testing needed in terms of automated or manual, and a really time is a true limiter, right? People do not want to integrate security testing that takes hours to run into a build process, right? They're not going to delay a build for a security test that maybe takes hours to run. So that may drive, okay, what's your policy around what kind of tests and when you test for that. And then again, just the conditions for when you want to trigger that testing, right? Do you have a policy that every time a developer checks in code, do I want to check it? Now, maybe you want to adjust that based on, well, are they checking in one line of code change, or are they adding a whole new component to an application? And then on the tail end of that process, right, is, okay, once you've discovered vulnerabilities, right, the ratio of AppSec developer or AppSec personnel to developers in any organization keeps growing and growing and growing. It used to be 1 to 100, 1 to 150. Yesterday I was talking to a customer; they're at 1 to 600 right now. So having a policy to be able to automatically apply to these vulnerabilities and use criteria like, okay, if it's in the OWASP top 10, that's something we really care about, or hey, we need to be PCI compliant. So if a vulnerability is covered by the PCI policy, then we want to prioritize that and fix that so we don't fall out of compliance. Obviously things like, hey, I want to fix critical and highs before I fix medium and lows. And then as well as, being able to enforce an SLA, generally that coming from some sort of policy that, hey, all critical vulnerabilities it must be fixed in 14 days. And so being able to apply that policy automatically and consistency is really going to help address that AppSec to developer gap and scale that up.
And I'd also add, Rod, one important part of what you said is you're taking the guesswork out of a lot of these critical decisions that oftentimes, when you're talking about the ratios of an AppSec to developer ratio in an organization, developers can often be burdened with making those security decisions for themselves. And that can be difficult for a lot of organizations to be able to scale that level of training. And so this takes a lot of the guesswork out of it in being able to automate a lot of these key aspects of being able to run testing and being able to run these critical activities. With that said, take us back to when we look at the overall summary of what a lot of what an ASPM solution enables you to do. What is the aspect here of what ASPM really provides value in understanding critical software risks from the aspect of all of these different aspects you have touched upon with being able to consolidate this data, consolidate your activities that you're running, and being able to, provide that value add in the last step of mapping your software risk?
Right. I mean, at the end of the day, if you've implemented a good ASPM process and solution, you now have that centralized source of truth, which greatly simplifies things like compliance reporting. It greatly gives you a way more accurate view of the risk of your organization, and it makes it very simple to identify what the most important thing I need to be working on and focusing on today. So if you've done all that work and you've got that central source of truth, things that used to be really time consuming and really difficult of figuring out, okay, am I compliant with PCI? Do I have any vulnerability? Have I resolved all the vulnerabilities that PCI calls out, or HIPAA, or OWASP Top 10 if you use that as a guideline? All of those types of things, it becomes very simple once you've brought in all that data, normalized it, standardized it. It makes the reporting and visibility so much easier.
So with that said, what does a day in the life look like from a practitioner's point of view in an ASPM-oriented workflow?
Yeah. So if you are, the first step is really discovery, right? how do I know that we're scanning and testing all the applications that are in my environment? So what, from a practical perspective, what can I use for that? Well, a good place to start might be your repo systems that your organization uses, right? And looking at all the applications that are in there. Another source might be a CMDB. Often that's the source of truth of the applications in there, and that can be used as an input into the ASPM of, here are the things that we need to monitor. And then the second thing is, figuring out how you want, I talked about ASPM potentially orchestrating the scans, or you could have other things that are orchestrating when and how scans are run and sending that data into the ASPM. So it could be when developers check in code. It could be during the pipeline build process. It could be on a schedule. It could be on demand. But determining, what kind of testing, how it's going to get triggered, when it's going to get triggered, and feeding that into the ASPM solution. And then the next step now is applying that policy, right? As those vulnerabilities are being fed into the ASPM, being able to automatically apply policy so that you can enforce things like SLAs on those vulnerabilities, so you can do some sort of a prioritization and triage, so that in the next step is then, basically filtering out the noise for the developers and giving the developers only the things that are the most important thing to work on. And usually that's done in the next step of resolution, right? The ASPM solution is integrated into your backlog management system, right? So this could be ADO, Jira, ServiceNow, any of those systems where work is organized for the developer, right? They can go ahead, and then as they work on those and resolving those, then the status changes in Jira. They say, hey, this is fixed. The ASPM solution now knows it's marked as fixed, and you can report that accurately. And then finally, all throughout this process, you have complete visibility now, for compliance reporting or for visibility, for assessment of, hey, are we getting better, or are we doing worse? And so with that workflow in mind, I just wanted to kind of maybe make it a little more concrete and show an example of how you could actually drive that workflow. And so let's start with that discovery phase, right? And again, a very simple way would be to go and take a look at your repo system and analyze, all right, well, how many repos do we have, and how many are we covering? So we can see here, for example, in my GitHub account, we've got 46 repos there, and right now we're monitoring 3 of them, and we can go in and see, very simply, which ones are being covered and which ones are not. And then if I wanted to say, well, I really do need to bring all of those in, I can go ahead and bring those in to the ASPM solution. The second thing that you want to do is, so as those vulnerabilities are coming in, you've established your integrations, perhaps into your CI pipelines, perhaps into things like GitHub Actions. You've established a schedule on when you want to do the scans, and now you're doing scans on these apps. You're pulling in results. Now you'll have an inventory of projects and findings to examine and triage. So before you do that, you're going to want to define your policies, right? And you'll be able to, do things. So, we talked about what, for your organization, what are the most important vulnerabilities that you want to focus on? It may just be severity. It may just be critical and high vulnerabilities, right? You may have a focus on a particular compliance standard. Any sort of criteria that you have, you're going to want to set up some kind of filter to match these findings as they come in. So like this organization says, we really want to focus on critical vulnerabilities that are described in the OWASP top 10. Right, and we're gonna have a policy that, hey, everything's going to be fixed, but it needs to be fixed within 14 days, right? And if that doesn't happen, if a finding stays open for longer than that, then we want to break the build, right? This is where your CI pipeline can go into your ASPM solution and say, hey, should I allow this to be promoted on to the next step? The ASPM solution can say, well, no, it's violating your policy. You need to fail this, right? once you have that policy in place, then it becomes very simple to let's go into a sample app here, this insecure bank application. And it's very easy to see here that we've applied our policy. We can see like we're in very bad shape here. This is probably something we want to investigate, that we've got vulnerabilities here that are 149 days past due beyond their SLA. So that's probably a red flag. You can also see that the policy created a JIRA issue. So we know it's on the developer's queue. We may want to have a discussion of why they haven't addressed it. And we can see here that the triage status, they've been marked to be fixed, right? So, for some reason, they're not being addressed. But if we dive in here, this is the type of information that we can give to the developer. And really, at the end of the day, we're trying to help them, give them all the information they need to fix this quickly. And so one of the nice things about normalizing all the results from all the different tools is here we're looking at a cross-site scripting vulnerability, right? You can provide a description, perhaps customized to your organization about what cross-site scripting is and guidelines on how to remediate it, right? You can provide in a central place maybe a quick training video on cross-site scripting and how to remediate that and provide that to the developer. Here, from a compliance perspective, we can see very simply, all the different compliance policies that this particular vulnerability is called out in. And when we talk about normalization of results from the source tools, sometimes that might imply, or you might think, and it's reasonable to think, oh, okay, so we're normalizing down to maybe the lowest common denominator of information. Certain tools have unique aspects and unique pieces of metadata that they provide that are very valuable. And you don't want to lose that information in the translation to the ASPM. So it's really important that you pull in, tool-specific metadata about it. They may give additional valuable context on how to mitigate and how to resolve this issue. And the ASPM tool can enhance that data. So, here we're looking at a static analysis vulnerability, or a vulnerability that was discovered via static analysis. Here we can provide a data flow, right? Of, okay, well, here's the user input that's coming in that you are, down here actually, using without doing any sort of filtering of the user input. And here, of course, showing the source code of, okay, here's exactly where the problem is. So all of this information can be given to the developer in a very uniform way across different types of vulnerabilities to help them resolve it very quickly. And because now that you have all the vulnerabilities listed here, it makes reporting very simple. Natasha, does the compliance report pop up here on the screen?
You know what? I do not see a progression in your screen from project findings, actually. I'm not sure if it's just on my end.
Yeah, it's okay. I think the screen share might be just showing the one tab, and I apologize for that. But in fact, we can, because I want to make sure that we cover this point very quickly. So, from that, you can generate, compliance specific reporting, or generate, just general reports on your vulnerabilities based on your, based on all that information that's been collected into that single project. And then another aspect of, there we go. Make sure I'm going to the right place. There we go. Is again, now that you have all this information centralized, it's very easy to get high levels of, or a high level view of the risk that this application is bringing to your application, right? So it makes risk scoring very easy. It gives you a very comprehensive view of, the distribution of criticality across your findings, statistics like average days to resolution, the trend of counts over time, broken up by the type of analysis that you're doing, metrics about your code. Remember how we talked about earlier about validating, are you doing the analysis on the schedule that you think? You can monitor that easily across all your different tool sets. Are you fixing things faster than they're coming in? Are you making progress or are you falling behind? As well as, things like, okay, what are the most common finding types? What are the areas that perhaps we need to do training and education around and focus on? And so you get all of that visibility when you're able to centralize this view.
All right. Well, Rod, thank you very much for that demo. And hopefully, folks, this was helpful in being able to highlight some very practical steps towards being able to implement an ASPM approach. And with that, I think we have some time for a few questions. Jess?
We do, yeah. We've got a lot of questions coming in, so I'm going to have to sort through them. I do want to say I'm seeing some high fives and some thanks coming in as well. I think definitely, and as you just said, Natasha, I think hitting on this sort of high level and then really digging into the practicality. It's fun to think strategy, and then it's great to get into what that actually looks like and how that affects. I love the way you said that, Rod. We're gonna get into the day-to-day. What does your day look like? And so that was really interesting. I think that really resonated with folks out there. We have a lot of questions coming in. We have only a few minutes left, so I'm going to get to as many as I can. And I'm going to start with this one here because I did see a couple of questions coming in around legacy tools and how are you actually integrating sort of new with existing systems. So could you talk to us a little bit about the human element of that and how the developers might kind of handle that, but then also just what that might look like in terms of, there was questions here around sorry, I'm sorting through all these wonderful questions here around whether or not that would be an issue with compromising the existing security postures if you've sort of got new and old coming together.
Yeah. So, when the reality is that you're going to have a wide range of applications, right? Some that have been around for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, maybe. And you've got stuff that has been developed with the latest and greatest technology, right? And the practical effect of that is that, the tooling that you may be using to do the same kind of analysis. So because of the age of the application and the technologies used, maybe you have to use a different static analysis tool than the one that you're using for for applications that are built using the latest web application frameworks and languages, right? So there, is a case where, sometimes when we talk about ASPM, we think, okay, well, we've got our SAT, we're pulling in our stuff from our SAS tool here and our DAS tool here, but it's very common in organizations to be using multiple tools for static analysis. And that's where an ASPM solution is very needed, because you need, even just to get an idea of what you're finding via static analysis and to centralize that, you can do that by bringing in from all of those static analysis tools that you're using to monitor those different kinds of apps.
Natasha, anything you want to add to that?
Gosh, Rod, you've left me speechless here.
Nailed it.
Do I win the Amazon gift card?
Yes, Rockstar A+ answer. Yes. No, that's great. And I think that a lot of the questions coming in are kind of centering around this sort of the complexities of different environments. And so we did get a couple of questions looking for some of those best practices around hybrid and distributed environments, and wondering if you can speak to any kind of takeaways on that end.
Yeah. So, when thinking about ASPM solutions, the reality is that organizations are using probably a combination of tools that are run on premise within the network and cloud, tools that are delivered via software as a service that live up in the cloud, and be able to integrate them all into one place. So when looking at an ASPM solution, you want to make sure that they're able to support integrations with those tools that are delivered, regardless of where they live, if they're running on the network or if they're up in the cloud somewhere.
Perfect. I'm sneaking in a final question because we're getting very close to the end of time here. I'm being a rebel today. What does an ASPM solution provide that my current vulnerability management solution isn't going to?
Right. So, the A in ASPM stands for application, right? So the workflow around application security testing and the processing and the workflow around that is maybe different from your traditional vulnerability management solutions, which they started out as, mainly those were a function of the IT team, right? They were focused on assets and networks and what have you. And that's a different workflow and life cycle than perhaps, how to make sure an application is secure. And so, there's some key differences in that. And so ASPM solutions are really focused around that. How do I make sure applications are secure?
And I would also really quickly add to what Rod said is that the key here is not just visibility into the security data, but really mapping the software inventory, which is a very different beast from what we've heard in the past with traditional CMDBs associated with IT infrastructure mapping and that sort of inventory mapping. And so especially what Rod talked about in today's presentation, mapping problems to the branch level, is a very key piece of insight in bridging the lack of visibility and often connection between the development and the security teams, and where an ASPM solution can really add value.
Yeah, and that's a great, I hate to say that's where we're going to leave it, but that's a great place to leave it, Natasha. I think that's a really wonderful takeaway. Before I do let you go, though, I want to make sure, because I was going to ask you this anyways, and then Ned asked as well. Ned, gold star on that one. Ned's wondering, what do I do to get started with Synopsys? How do I learn more? So what's a good follow-up to anyone that's kind of feeling lit up and ready to keep this conversation going?
So we've attached to this webinar today a lot of resources from Synopsys that give a lot more context to some of what we presented to you today. Other than that, please check out our blog and our YouTube for a lot more content on very practical steps to get started with Synopsys products and going on your ASPM journey. We have a lot of very insightful thought leadership from some of our experts here.
Well, I want to thank you both for coming to join us today, because this has been a very interesting conversation. Clearly, there's lots more to be said here and many more questions to get into. I am going to make sure that all the questions that we did not get to discuss today are sent on to your team, so you will have a chance to follow up with them. So for anyone that asked a question and hasn't gotten an answer in our live Q&A, stay tuned, because you will get some answers back. But Natasha, Rod, I want to thank you so much for leading us through this really interesting and in-depth conversation. I hope we get to chat again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. And to all of you that are out there looking to learn a little bit more, I'm going to remind you again, as Natasha just said, please do go visit that handouts tab. There are so many takeaways. Just naming a few here. There's a guide on 3 steps to improving AppSec program, another guide on how to scale application security across the enterprise. So this is a fantastic follow-up. This is what we were just talking about. This is, again, that scalability is so important. You've got a couple of ebooks, one on consolidate and simplify. I love that. That's a great place to start. We all want to simplify, right? If we can make things a little bit more streamlined, that's good for everyone. So if you're interested in streamlining application security to manage software risk, make sure you get that ebook, as well as manage AppSec risk at enterprise scale. There's a white paper on application security, what to look for and why, and then a report on software vulnerability snapshot. So really just an incredible and in-depth walkthrough on all of the aspects that we were just getting from Natasha and Rod. I highly, highly recommend, if you haven't already done so, open those tabs, download those resources, make sure that you are taking those away after we wrap up. I promise that you will want them. And hey, if you're talking to your friends about it, your colleagues about it, after we wrap, you're going to want to be able to show them all those cool takeaways as well. I also want to say a big thank you to everyone who's asking questions, and I'm still seeing some high fives and thank yous coming in from all of you, and I really appreciate that. It's so nice to see all those good vibes and know that we were kind of all buzzing along together as we explored this idea today. Speaking of buzzy, before we wrap up, we do have one more bright, shiny piece of information, and that is our prize winner. So let's go ahead and do our $250 Amazon gift card, going to someone who is live live, present, and a little bit lucky here at the webinar. And that special someone is Artin Arakelian from California. Artin Arakelian from California. Congratulations to you, Artin. As always, we will be in touch about claiming your prize after we wrap. Now, don't forget, there is that $50 best question card coming at our best question asked. I can tell you the competition is fierce today, but we will follow up with you once we've wrapped up. So with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to once again thank Synopsys for making this webinar possible. A big and heartfelt thank you to Natasha and to Rod for guiding us through such an interesting conversation. The demo, that was so fascinating. Lots of great takeaways and cool conversations starting here. And that really is the best part of why we all come together, right? And that is why my biggest high five, my biggest thank you goes to all of you out there for joining in, for making this conversation possible. You know, as I said before, I really like when we get to kind of start in the clouds and the strategy, and we're talking high level and we're talking about the big problems we're trying to solve, and then we get to zoom in on what's important to you and what you can take away and what you can put into action when you walk away from this webinar, because this is just the starting point, right? And now you get to take all these cool ideas and you get to make things happen in your organization, and that is the best part of these webinars. All right, well, a big thank you again to all of you. I hope that I get to see you all at a webinar again soon. And until then, have an absolutely beautiful end to your day. Thanks, my friends.